You will get out of this earthbound state when you rise to the sensitivity of that next planet.
All right, I'm pretty sure we're live. Welcome to another episode of Dispersing the Cloud. This is the first live episode with a guest. With me now, I got David Rozzo. David, say what's up.
How's it going?
As we see the brim of your hat, he's good enough to be in a car outside Barnes & Noble. He's actually doing some book shopping today. And he was actually just telling me off camera that Barnes & Noble was suggesting a bunch of books to him. And unfortunately, he had already read those. Is that a big problem, David?
Just a little bit, but I'll survive.
So this is episode 57 of Dispersing the Cloud. We're going to be talking about The Quiet. And the author of this book, who was it, David?
Susan Cain.
Susan Cain. So before we get started on Susan Cain's book, I got you on the screen here. Why don't you just tell everybody a little bit about yourself and what you do?
You want to know if I'm my horoscope and everything else I like to do for fun? I like nice walks in the snow and to freeze my butt off here in New England. That's a little bit about me.
You're working for the Boys.
I work for a local nonprofit, correct? Yes.
Oh, okay.
The Boys and Girls Club.
Gotcha.
I oversee operations, things of that nature, and I'm on this podcast because I enjoy reading.
All right. He won't tell you this, but he's doing things, man. He's working. We'll just jump right into it, man. This book was about introverts, and it was really interesting to me because I dated an introvert, and I didn't understand it till I read this book. Actually, reading this book explains so much about this individual, and it made so much sense. Like I was always trying to pull her out of her quote unquote shell. I'll start with this first quote here. We say we want individuals, but the truth is we only accept one type of individual, those who are comfortable in the spotlight or most outspoken. We make exceptions for tech geniuses who start up companies, or the rich, they get a pass, but for the everyday person, there's only one type of person that's accepted, and that's the extrovert. So when I'm reading a lot of this book, and I'm thinking, even as it was going through some of the tendencies of introverts, I have some of the tendencies of an introvert, but if you asked anybody that I know and talk to, I'm definitely an extrovert, and I almost started questioning my own extraversion, have I just conformed to what society wants me to be? What was your general take on just the premise of the book?
So it offered perspective. You touched on a little bit as far as coming out of your show, how society deems certain classes of people, how they interact, their personalities. And I believe it offers a suggestion to that, kind of like a reasoning for why people act the way they do. Susan Cain she discusses a lot of how people interact in crowds. Just the fact that you and I are talking right now, I don't say as much. I'm a little more... I know for a fact I'm an introvert.
Yeah, I was actually just going to say that.
Yeah, so I am always against the walls in a group. I tend to be more quiet than outspoken. And so in regards to that, it relates to me, and I can understand the perspective and the direction she's coming from.
So this is kind of interesting. When David was one of my college roommates when I was going to Cal Bap, and we used to, he's the one who taught me the value of really reading a lot. And we used to have this huge big screen TV in our apartment, and it had this little tiny sign on it. It said, what are you doing to make yourself successful? And so, and so we hardly ever watched TV with this giant TV we had going on. And every time I would come in from class, this guy would be sitting in his little easy chair with a little stack of books next to him. He'd be reading some philosophy book. And I'd walk in and classical music would be playing. And that sign was never moved. I don't think you ever moved that sign. I moved that sign quite a
I
bit.
remember it.
And you'd walk in and you go, "What is this, dude? What are you doing?" This next quote is pretty awesome, and it kind of explains a little bit about the nature of introversion. And the two, I'll say both the quotes because they kind of go together. We are told to come out of our shells, but we forget that some animals in our kingdom carry around shells as part of their nature. And shyness is inherently painful. Introversion is not. If you take introversion as a genetically transferable trait, which we believe it to be, it's not, right? And if it was negative, then wouldn't it have slowly eliminated itself through attrition? That was super interesting because she was pointing out that there are positives to being an introvert. What were some of, you, as someone who considers himself to be an introvert, what do you think some of the positivities are that you get from it?
Again, I'm going to revert back to the perspective side of things. I believe this book, she discusses a lot about that. That you're right, this introvert mentality would have filtered out by now in human civilization, but it didn't. And there's a reason for that. And I think a lot of it is you need the yin to the yang. You need the extrovert to the introvert. You need that relationship. You need to have both sides of that because together they're able to do great things. And you think of any great person, there's always that person behind them, that person next to them, that brought out certain perspectives, certain aspects and qualities that they did not have. I think the example she uses, one of the examples is the Franklin D. Roosevelt and his wife, and how she brought out certain qualities about him that he would not have brought out, and he in turn brought out qualities about her that were beneficial. It's just perspective, I guess, and kind of understanding, when you look at someone, when you talk to someone and you see someone and why they are the way that they are.
I kind of found it appealing that I guess she's a lawyer. Correct me if I'm wrong. She was a lawyer, and she found that her introversion actually transferred over as almost like a position of power in her negotiations. People took her silence as she used it as a negotiating tactic to be calm, cool, collected when everybody else the extroverts are raising their voices and getting all fired up. She was just staying very chill. And they were almost intimidated by that silence. When inside, she's thinking, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God."
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty cool. Next quote I have on here is, "My point of disagreement." Oh, this is something I disagreed with. Would have to fly with her position on. Oh, so my point of disagreement was, and I try to find, every time I read a book, I try to find one point where I disagree. That way I'm not just like sucking in everything, and being like, oh, this is fact, this is truth. I want to have my own perspective on stuff. She was referring to the evangelical experience, the church experience, as a 100% extrovert experience. And I would agree with her to the point of, when you go to church, yes. But if you're involved in a church, no, because we do something called small groups, and there's a lot to do with like getting quiet time by yourself with God or with prayer or with meditation that I think it's like you just said, like the yin and the yang. But again, she just went to a couple church services and were like, dude, this is not for me. And back to the friends that I have that are introverts, like church services in themselves necessarily, I see you're grinning, because they're not necessarily like, they don't jazz you up like they jazz me up. Like I love playing music and I love being there and all the above, but.
Well, ironically, she, I don't mean to cut you off. Ironically, she the person she analyzed was
Rick
Rick
Warren.
Warren.
That's right.
You know, a guy that you and I both have heard.
Yeah, we heard him speak a couple times.
Yeah, and so he's not part of our alma mater.
I totally forgot. He is part of CalBAP.
Yeah. So it's interesting that she made that connection. And I will say, and I mean, the more I read, the more I've noticed this. Everything is perspective. And I keep referring back to that because the more I read, the more I learn that. That's her perspective on introverts. Do I agree with everything she said? No. Do I agree with a lot of things? Yes. At the very least, she provided a different perspective. Now, I have read the book that she references quite a bit. That is the extrovert, Bible, if you will.
What is it?
Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends.
Yeah.
How to Win and Influence Friends, right?
That's a good one.
I've read that. You know, and so I can see the connection she's trying to make, the correlation she makes with both those books. She doesn't badmouth it in any way, but she just offers a different perspective and kind of, you know, going along with the mentality that we should all strive to be extroverts. You know, that's why Dale Carnegie's book sold so many millions of copies.
Because that's what we're trying to be.
Exactly. I don't agree with everything she said, everything in her book, but I do agree with some of it. And at the very least now, she's given me another perspective to an argument that, not even an argument, a concept that I can grasp and I can decide on my own. I enjoy reading the quote-unquote extrovert introvert books, the Dale Carnegie book, the Susan Cain book, because they're almost polar opposites. And then I am able to decide with enough information what I feel is my perspective, my point of view. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
You know, I'm getting both sides of the argument before
so you can decide for yourself.
Exactly. And I have, you know, valuable feedback. Obviously, there's decades of research on these types of ideas, and Susan Cain, you know, she touches on that on a couple different times throughout the book. So it's good. I mean, like I said, if nothing else, it provides an idea to someone that maybe didn't have an understanding of that particular topic.
This next quote is actually really relates to me, and I think it's part of the reason that I actually have some introversion and some extraversion. I think me being involved with sports made me extroverted, but this next quote, solitude is a catalyst to invention. It is an important key to creativity. As someone who is an artist, as someone who is I can't say author. I'm a children's book author. We're looking at this guy. I'm a children's book author, but I mean, I'm a writer. So I think author is the wrong word, but someone who writes music and has a creative aspect.
Lost you there for a minute.
Oh, you're still with me. I'm just pontificating upon the world. I'm just chatting. You're good. I still got your feed. I'm just talking about creativity and how seclusion and I guess introversion fosters that type of catalyst. Catalyst is the wrong word. I'm gonna have to call him back because we lost him. So the next quote, I'm just going to continue on while he's coming back online. The next quote is open source that attracts. It does not reflect groupthink. So this next quote was actually about open source. And open source is a awesome idea, and it's actually where we get the idea of groupthink. It's like, oh, hey, if we get a lot of people in a room, then we're going to get some really good ideas. Actually, the studies that they did, they found that they weren't getting better ideas having more people in the room. They're actually getting less ideas and getting less work done. But open source actually works really, really well. Open source works good because you have the screen right? As a barrier. There's a barrier between you and me. So although I'm giving you my ideas right now, there's really no one else in this room other than Adam over here, my guy. He's doing some work on our sound stage and some other stuff. But other than that, there's no one else here, so it's just me. So I can still technically exercise introversion while broadcasting. And this little side note, I realized about 10 minutes into this video that we recorded, but we never went live. So this isn't live on YouTube right now, unfortunately, but I'll post it as soon as the video is done. We're almost done through this, and we'll see if David comes back on here. In mine, yours is all me. Another. Sometimes I use speak text to take these notes because I'm in the gym when I'm listening to these books, and a lot of times it does not come out. So I have no idea what I was trying to say right there. That's why one can never be alone enough when one writes. This kind of relates back to what I was just talking about. I think the best ideas that I've ever had come from solitude, come from quiet, come from being really just alone and segregated away from everybody. I do some of my best writing up in the immigrant wilderness, which is like 22 miles away from civilization. You go into the woods, and then you hike to the wilderness. There's like this little point on the path, and there's a sign that says you're entering the immigrant wilderness, and anything beyond that, it's like, hey, you're kind of on your own. And then we hike another 20 miles in to Upper Immigrant Lake, and there is literally not another human being anywhere near. And I do some of my best writing up there, just totally secluded and away from everybody else. It's a pretty awesome experience. Okay, so what else we got? There is no correlation between extraversion and cold call ability. This was really, really interesting. So for anyone who does sales, if you do sales, you know you got to do cold calls. I've been doing sales for the last like 5-6 years. Some for myself, working for Fragoza Media, and some working for other companies selling their products. And I used to think that extroverts were great on the phone, but when they explained it like this, extroverts usually get a little distracted. So we're money on the phone. Our calls are super, super solid, but we make less of them because we get really, really distracted. But introverts, they're not as vibrant on the phone, but they stay focused on the task at hand, and they just keep hammering away at that task, and the results end up coming out roughly the same for introversion and extroversion. If genius is 1% inspiration and 99 perspiration, then as a culture, we lionize the 1%, and we love. We lionize the. We lionize the 1%. If genius is 1% and 99 perspiration, we're all about the 99. We don't want anything to do with that 1%. Although that's really the genius. I thought that was pretty insightful. It is not that I am so smart, said Edison. It is that I stay on problems longer. I have two different trains of thought on this. I think when it comes to math, science, yes. Sometimes when it comes to the arts, I'd say no. And the reason I would say no is because the very first episode of Dispersing the Cloud I did was a book called Big Magic. And it talked about ideas being these songs and poems, being these ideas that just kind of float around and are looking to be discovered. And once you've opened yourself up to receiving one of these poems and songs, it's like they go whisper to other poems and songs and let them know, like, hey, this person is totally down to create you and bring you to completion, and then they just start coming to you more often. And then I noticed that if I would just linger a little bit longer, and when I say longer, I'm talking sometimes I'll get a song in a day. But when one comes to me, I literally drop everything that I'm doing, and I just sit there and listen, and I sit there and wait. I'll spend 3-4 hours on the piano, and I'll just be waiting for it to give me the rest of it. And then you can kind of tell when it like goes away. Give it a break, walk away from it for a couple hours, go do a task, come back down, sit at the piano, play it again with fresh ears, and all of a sudden it'll give you the next little part. And I've written a lot of my best songs just in a day. And so I think with art, it's a little different. Well, with this particular type of art, with this poetry type of art. But with math, science, engineering, definitely spending more time and just thinking and thinking through problems. I will say this though. Now I'm going to backtrack a little bit. There are times where I'll have written a song and I think it's done, and then months and months and months later, I'll get another part to the song, and you're like, how does that fit in? And it almost like grows and continues. So I think I would agree in that point. If you're not looking at that first song as a completion, you're just saying that you play. I mean, I'd be at shows playing. There's one song in particular I'm thinking of, Far North. I actually released the song to SoundCloud, and then a couple years later I added a 2-minute ending to it because it was incomplete. I just thought it was complete the whole time, and then once I realized it wasn't, that ending just kind of fell in place. So if you're curious of what that sounds like, you can go check out Far North on SoundCloud under #MoreThanRules. Little plug for myself there. Warren Buffett says this about his life as an investor. This is a really cool quote. I picture myself laying on my back painting the 16th chapel, and it feels really good when people come by and they say, "Whoa, what a beautiful painting." That feels good because it's my painting. But sometimes people will come by and they'll say, "Why don't you use more red?" or "Why don't you use more blue?" I just say, "Go away." Because it'll always be my painting, and it will never be done. This is a great way to look at your career, a great way to look at art. I think it mashes up pretty well with what I just said about the song evolving over time, and I'm constantly changing stuff that I have done and thought was finished, and it just becomes something more. I just really like that quote. It's a great perspective. And I don't necessarily think that has to do too much with introversion, other than to say that if you're an introvert, just keep rocking and do what you do. The friend that I mentioned that is an introvert, she's an amazing mind, an amazing person, amazing mind. She does poetry. She's definitely probably too shy to let anybody read that stuff, but she rocks it, and as she continues to do what she does, she's gonna make waves in her life. Inventors tend to self motivate. Why do you envy? That is your true self. I have no clue what that means. I don't know what I was writing there. Find a restorative niche. This is a pretty cool little quote, and one of the last ones I'm going to bounce out here pretty quick because I don't think David's coming back on. Let me see if I can get it back. Find a restorative niche. A restorative niche is something that's going to restore your soul, your aspect on life. When I'm not feeling productive, when I'm not feeling myself, what I do is I go sit at the piano and I write. That's my restorative niche. I find music. I'm always trying to play new stuff that I've never played before, and I'm taking requests on Instagram, and I'm trying to just play music. You know, it's my restorative niche. It's how I find myself. So I thought that was a great quote. People who suppress negative emotions have suffered memory loss or memory impairment. That was really interesting. That was just an interesting quote, and I forget what context she was using that for. But when you're suppressing negative emotions, I think she's talking about trying to be an extrovert when you're an introvert. You know, if you're an introvert and you're trying to be an extrovert, you would have to suppress those negative emotions that come with extraversion. And I think that's, I mean, you're damaging yourself, your mental health. You're damaging your mental health. All in all, this book was a 5. This book was fantastic. I like, you know what, 4.5, because I don't want to get crazy with the 5s. I thought it was insightful. I thought it was different. I thought it was pretty cool. I'm really bummed we lost David. I'm bummed we didn't get to do this live. But all in all, first guest on Dispersing the Cloud could have went worse. Trust me, it could have went worse. So I'm going to shut this bad boy off. I'm going to edit it up, post it up. I appreciate you guys watching. Tomorrow, we're going to attempt this again because I'm a week behind right now. So this was episode 57. Tomorrow, we're doing 58 with Julian Macias. He's coming on, and we are going to review Ego is the Enemy. We already did that once. We're also going to be talking about The Shack. And a little bit of theology and a little bit of stoicism, and that show will probably be tomorrow. Let's say tomorrow is Sunday, and let's say we're probably going to go around noon California time. Midwest, it's going to be about 2 o'clock here for us. Okay, so that's it. Dispersing the Cloud. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you later.